Good morning. Let's begin this morning with a moment of prayer. I feel like we've been a little hairy here this morning because of the sound system and some other hecticness of transition. So let's begin with a moment of prayer before we move forward today. Gracious God, we thank you so much for this opportunity to gather together as a community of faith, Lord, in your name, to not only learn more about you, but hopefully, Lord, to grow closer to you and to grow closer in our obedience and faithfulness to you and your call in our lives. Over the next few weeks, Lord, we are going to be asking the question, who is our neighbor? Who are the people that you are calling us to reach out to in love and compassion and in service, to be neighbors to them and to see them as our neighbors? We ask, Lord, today that you would begin to illuminate our hearts and our minds, that you would help us, Lord, to have clarity and understanding about who you call us to view as our neighbors and who you are calling us to be a neighbor to. And so, Lord, we pray that you would bless this time together. We pray that you would bless the meditations of our hearts and our minds and our words, that they would be pleasing to you and we would grow closer to you. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Marilyn already, I think, mentioned this, but we're going to be passing around the offering plates. We want to do this here at the beginning because I think toward the end our choir members tend to leave to go prepare for choir. That was not intended as a joke. My apologies if that was rude on my part. That was not intended that way. But we want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to contribute to the offering. And the offering, I think Marilyn already mentioned this, and it's on the announcements on the back of your handout, but they're there really to help provide for the donuts and the coffee and the services that we provide for Join Together July over the next few weeks. Thank you so much for your contribution and service in that way. Good morning again, and welcome to Join Together July. Some of you may know me, and some of you may not. My name is Dr. David Brewer. That appellation doctor is new. I actually just finished a PhD and graduated at the end of June, so I'm very grateful. My wife and I have been members of the church for a couple of years now, and we had an opportunity to start getting to know you all last summer during Join Together July. They asked my wife and I both to help lead a couple of the sessions, and that's when we first really began getting to know you all and really digging into the church. And so it was a really meaningful opportunity for us, and I'm grateful to be back again this year and to help with Join Together July. And it's been a real pleasure working with Pastor Sandra and the clergy staff, as well as Don Lang and the Adult Education Committee, helping plan and organize, especially the theme for this month, this summer. The theme for our series this year, Join Together July, is the question, who is our neighbor? And we hope that this is a theme that will not just last for these next 5 weeks, but really will be a theme that will be a guiding theme for us throughout the next few months and years for our worship services, for our Sunday school classes, our Bible studies, and the other ministries of our church. As we continue to wrestle with the question, who is our neighbor? Who are the people in our community that God is calling us to reach out to love, to serve, to be of service to minister to? Who is the community that God is calling us to reach out to around us? And in some ways, the question that we're being asked is, what is our mission field? Who are the people that we are being called to reach out to? And there's also sort of this growing awareness that our communities are becoming increasingly more diverse, culturally and religiously speaking. And so the fuller question here is not just who is our neighbor or who is our mission field, but how can we be of service to our mission field when they are religiously and culturally different from us? How can we begin to reach out to our neighbors when they are very different from us? They look different than us. They speak different than us. Their life practices may be different than ours are. So how do we begin to reach out to them? And this is very much in keeping with the Great Commission. Christ calls us to go into all the world and make disciples. What do we do when all the world is outside our backyard? When all the world has arrived at our doorstep? How do we go into all the world and begin making disciples of Jesus Christ? I want to start here this morning just by giving you sort of a preview of where we're going to be going over the next 5 weeks. Today, I want to begin by wrestling with that question, who is our neighbor, from 3 different lenses. The first lens is the biblical and theological lens. What does Scripture tell us about who our neighbor is and who we're called to be as a neighbor to the people around us? The second lens is the demographic lens. I want to spend a little bit of time today talking specifically about the demographics of Johns Creek. What are the numbers and statistics and figures about the people in our community who comprises the cultural and religious makeup of our community? And then the third lens I want to look at today is the missional lens. And this is one that we won't dive into too much today. In fact, it's going to comprise most of our discussion of the 5th session. But I want to get the ball started on that one. I want to begin thinking about how do we engage in mission with the world around us when the world around us is culturally and religiously different from us. So let's go ahead and begin. I want to start with the first lens, asking the question. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't finish talking about the next couple weeks. Let me do that really quick. So those are the 3 lenses we're going to be looking at today. Starting next week and for the next 3 weeks, we're going to invite representatives from each of the major faith traditions in our community to come and share with us a little bit about their experience practicing their faith, and specifically practicing their faith in our community, in our area. So next week we're going to invite a gentleman named Tarif Saeed from the Muslim community to come and share a little bit about his faith. Our new clergy, Pastor Brandon, will help facilitate that conversation. It's going to be sort of a panel discussion. We'll have a table up here next week, and Pastor Brandon will help sort of lead that discussion with some questions and allow Tarif to sort of share informally about his faith and about his experience here in North Georgia. The week after that, we'll have someone else from the Jewish community, and then the week after that, we'll have somebody from the Hindu community come and share about their experiences. And then the 5th week, we will talk, as I said earlier, a little bit more about specifically how we can plan to be in mission with the world around us. And some of that may mean brainstorming new ideas about how we can engage the world around us. But I'd also like to think that it may just mean rethinking the ministries we already have. I know that as members of a church, we often feel a sense of burnout when we impose too many ministries, right? We start getting too many ministries up and rolling. So one of the questions I'm hoping we'll be able to wrestle with is, how can we take some of the existing ministries that we already have and begin to shape them in a way that can address this missional call that we have? So the 5th week will be devoted to that as well. Today, again, I want to begin this conversation by looking at this question through these 3 lenses. Who is our neighbor? Who is our neighbor theologically, biblically? Who is our neighbor in terms of the demographics of Johns Creek? And then who is our neighbor missionally? Let's start with the biblical and theological lens. If you have your Bibles, either in the good old-fashioned book-bound version or on your phones or some device, you're welcome to use those as well. I invite you to turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. We'll be reading about the parable of the Good Samaritan, which addresses this question specifically, who is our neighbor? So Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" The man answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But the man wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins. He gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This is a familiar passage for us, and in some ways it may be too familiar. I remember as a kid hearing this story, and the basic takeaway as a child was, go be a good person. Go be a nice person. Do kind things to other people. That's good, but it misses the radicalness of the parable that Jesus is telling. In order to understand how radical this parable would have been to Jesus' hearers, you have to understand something of the context and the relationship between Jews and Samaritans at this time. The relationship would have been very similar to the relationship between Jews and Palestinians today, or between blacks and whites during the antebellum South. They would have hated each other. And in fact, more specifically, Jews would have hated Samaritans. Samaritans were descendants of Jews who had intermarried with other people in the land, and so they were considered something of a mixed race. They were not of pure Jewish descent. And so Jews looked down upon them. They despised them. And in fact, it's part of the reason why the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well is so radical. I don't know if you remember that story very well, but Jesus meets this woman at the well and asks for water from her and offers her living water. When the disciples come back, they find Jesus and they're baffled by why he's there. Why are you in Samaria to begin with? Why are you hanging out with Samaritans? And why are you talking to a woman? Right? These are radical relationships that Jesus is having. At the time, Jews would have gone well out of their way to avoid going through Samaritan land. They would have gone like 30 or 40 minutes out of their way from Galilee down to Judea just to avoid going through Samaria, where Samaritans would have lived. This is how bad the tension would have been between Jews and Samaritans. And let me be clear, this was a racial issue. It was a racial tension. The divide was over issues of race and somewhat religion as well. One of the pieces of the conversation that Jesus has with the Samaritan woman at the well is over religious practices. And so the division here is a racial one as well as a religious one. I apologize, I lost my train of thought. So the issue is a racial one here that Jesus is trying to highlight. So the radicalness of this story is this. We are supposed to see ourselves from the perspective of the man who was beaten up inside the parable. When Jesus starts telling this story of a man who's traveling down the road, first of all, the people Jesus is talking to are Jews. Jesus is Jewish. The people he's talking to are Jewish as well. And so when he starts the story and starts saying, a man is traveling down the road, the immediate assumption is, okay, this is a Jewish person. He's a Jewish person walking down the road, and he gets jumped and beat up, right? And so the equivalent of this story today, if we were to tell this parable today, it would sound something like this. A member of Johns Creek was driving down 141 when they get pushed off the road by a band of thugs and bandits. And they're Their wallet is stolen, their car is hijacked, they're beaten and left half for dead on the side of the road. And then Pastor Brandon is driving down the road, and he sees, welcome.
That's what I get for sitting right here.
Glad you're here.
Thanks.
I had a side note. Pastor Brandon would love this.
Lori's next. Where's Lori?
Pastor Brandon is driving down the side of the road, and he sees this member of Johns Creek lying on the side of the road. But he's new. He doesn't know us very well. He doesn't know the area very well. He's just come from Alabama. He's not sure what he's going to do, right? He doesn't know where the local hospital is where to take this person, right? So he keeps driving. Doesn't do anything. The Pastor Sandra drives by and sees this person on the side of the road, but she's in a rush. She's in a hurry to get to another meeting. And so she keeps driving. But then an illegal immigrant is driving down the road and sees this person lying on the side of the road, beaten half for dead. And this illegal immigrant pulls his truck over, stops and bandages this person's wounds, puts the person in his truck, drives the person to a local hotel, rents a room, takes the person up to the room, puts him in bed, tends to his wounds. Then he goes to the hotel manager and says, here's $500. I'll be gone for a couple days, and when I come back, I'll reimburse you for any other expenses that you have. This is closer to how radical this parable would have been for Jesus' hearers. And the point is, we're supposed to see ourselves as the person who's been beaten up. And when we wake up in the bed in the hotel room and ask the hotel staff, who put me here? Who saved my life? And was it Pastor Brandon? Was it Pastor Sandra? No, I'm sorry, we don't know who those people are. It was an illegal immigrant. I'm sorry, an illegal immigrant? Saved my life. This is how radical this story was to Jesus' hearers. And at the end of the parable, Jesus asks the lawyer, who in this story was the neighbor? Notice that Jesus changes the question. The lawyer starts off by asking the question, who is my neighbor? And notice that when he asks the question, it's a way of trying to trap Jesus, of testing Jesus. The question has this kind of connotation to it. Okay, Jesus, I'm a pretty good guy. I love God. I obey the commandments. And I love my neighbor. Who do you think my neighbor is? Because sure, I'm a good guy to the people who live next door to me. And that's when Jesus tells this parable. And at the end of the parable, he asks this question. Not who is my neighbor, but who acted as a neighbor? Who in this story took the actions of the neighbor? And the lawyer is forced to respond, the illegal immigrant. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. My understanding of this parable is that Jesus is trying to obliterate the distinction between neighbor and enemy. And that the clearest place where Jesus talks about this is in the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. I'm sure you're familiar with this. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, Jesus says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. And pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. I'm going to skip a little bit. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than anyone else? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. And pray for those who persecute you. For Jesus, the kingdom of God, there is no distinction between neighbor and enemy. Who is my neighbor? Anyone. Anyone that God puts in our path. And so over the next few weeks, the term enemy may be too strong. I don't want us to view the people in our community as enemies, but it is a capping stone, right? What is the limit? What's the capstone, right? It's a similar question that when the disciples asked Jesus, how many times should we forgive somebody? 7 times? And Jesus says 70 times 7, right? There is no limit. Forgive as often as you need to forgive. What's the cap limit to who my neighbor is? There is no limit. Go as far as your enemy. This is your neighbor. And not only is that your neighbor, but go and be the neighbor. Go into the world and be the neighbor to those who are around you, even those who are your enemies. And so over the next few weeks, as we continue to talk about the question, who is our neighbor, this, I believe, needs to be the biblical and spiritual underpinning of the conversation. Anyone in our community is our neighbor. I want to transition now into the demographic lens and look specifically at the numbers of Johns Creek. What is Johns Creek made up of, culturally and religiously speaking? And we do have some sheets. I'd like to have those passed out at this point. I've got a packet that has some graphs and some numbers on them, and we'll make sure that we pass those around and that you all get to take a look at those. Most of the information that we'll be going over today is taken from an organization called Mission Insight. It's a faith-based organization that tries to keep up-to-date numbers and figures and statistics about different sorts of demographic aspects of different kinds of communities, specifically for this purpose, so that churches have information in their hands about what their mission field is like. These numbers are as recent, I think, as 2012, 2015, so we're a couple of years out from it, but there's at least one chart that projects into 2019 a bit, so they're about as current as they can be. There's about as up to date as they can be. I'll make one other quick caveat. I'm not a statistics guy. I'm not a numbers guy. I've had to do this a couple of times here. The last year, I've had a couple of sessions of different things where I've had to pull together numbers and statistics, and I always find myself kind of trepidatiously doing it. It's like this is not really my background or training, but I think the numbers are helpful. And so as soon as everybody has them, we'll start kind of diving into that. I think they're just about passed out at this point.
That's the only copy?
Yeah.
Oh, well, here. I've got it in an email somewhere. It's often maybe they got you give away your
So if you'll look at your sheet, we'll just go through this kind of point by point. Again, just to have the information in hand. And you can keep this with you over the next few weeks. It'll just, like I said, very helpful information to have. I'll try to draw out some important points as we go along. If you'll notice, the total population of Johns Creek is about 83,000 people. The first chart shows you a breakdown of the cultural percentages. We're going to be looking specifically. There's tons of data on the people in our area, ages and median income, housing, there's all kinds of data. But we're going to be focusing specifically on cultural data and on religious data. And we'll start with the cultural and then we'll move to the religious. So culturally speaking, this first chart shows you a breakdown of the percentages of the different races and cultures that are represented in our community. Not surprisingly, the majority is white. I don't think that's going to surprise most of us. But notice that it's not an overwhelming majority. It's a little over 60%. But that means that almost 40% of the rest of the population is some other ethnicity other than white. And we'll see this in a minute, that tracks with languages as well. That while about 60% of people speak English at home, about 40% or a little under 40% speak a different language at home. So a little over 60% are white. And then we have about 23.36 are Asian. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. But almost a quarter of the population is some form of Asian. Blacks represent 9.2%, Hispanics 5.21%, two or more races is 2.42%, some other race alone 1.4%, American Indian is 0.1%, Pacific Islanders 0.3%. As I noted, Asian populations represent about a quarter of our community. So I've got another graph here at the bottom that shows you a breakdown. The term Asian is a sort of catch-all term that canvasses a number of different sorts of Asian communities. By far the highest representation is Asian Indian at about 37.4%. Those would be mostly people literally from India. The second highest number is Korean. That's at 30.27%. And then in third place is Chinese at 21.24%. And then there's some other smaller percentages for other Asian representation that you can look at in the graph. As I said a minute ago, the languages track pretty well with the cultural representation. So a little less than 60% speak English in the home. That doesn't mean that, I believe, I may be wrong about this, but I believe that the survey is asking the question of the primary language spoken in the home. That doesn't mean that they can't speak English outside the home, in the workplace, or at schools. It just means that the question that's being asked is, what's the primary language being spoken in the home? And so just under 60% is English. Again, about a quarter is some form of Asian language, whether that's from India or Korea or Chinese. 10% is a European language, 3.8% is Spanish. I forgot what this 1.7 is. I don't have a note on that. Probably other. Do you have it? Okay, good. I didn't have it on mine. Good, thank you. Mine's a little bit different from yours. Thank you. So just other. Okay. The next graph gives you a sense of trends over time. Whether or not these populations are growing or diminishing over time. If you'll notice that there is not a significant increase or decrease over about a 10-year span. This graph tracks from about 2010 and it projects into 2019. And if you'll notice that there isn't a sizable change. There are some small percentile changes of about 0.2, 0.3%. for some of these communities, but not a major change over time. So in 2010, there were about, I don't know how to read this exactly, 105,000 whites. In 2010, there were 35,000 Asians. And though there's been some uptick over the last 10 years, but the ratio has remained basically the same. So this 60 to 40% has remained basically the same over 10 years. And looks to be pretty consistent, at least over the next 2 years into 2019. And then I want us to look a little bit about the religious affiliations. So this final graph gives you a sense of what the major religions are in our community. And again, it shows you how those track over a 10-year period. So in 2000, it compares the 2005 to 2015 numbers. So we have, I've got listed here, Catholic and Orthodox is one group, Protestant is one group, Islam is a group, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Catholics in 2005 represented about 23.8%. They are now around 2015, we're 19.8%. Protestants, 48%. Now down to 47% about in 2015. Islam has stayed basically the same, about 0.6%. Judaism has remained pretty consistent, 5.5, now 5.3. Buddhism and Hinduism Buddhism has been kind of grouped together, and again, it's a pretty small percentile, but there's been a pretty significant growth as well. So it started in 2005 at 0.8, it's now at 1.3%. I want to make a couple of notes about this. Statistics are a bit misleading. While it's true that there's a relatively small percentage of Muslims, Jews, Hindus, and Buddhists who live in our community, that's still a good number of people, right? So even though Jews represent about 5.3%, we're still talking about close to 4,500 people, right? Those are real people who live in our community. Likewise, with Muslims, we have about 500 practicing Muslims in our community, and a little over 1,000 Hindus and Buddhists in our community. But the other point I want to make about this, especially about the religious affiliation, is that, again, as we talked about a minute ago with the distinction between neighbor and enemy, I don't think God thinks quantitatively, right? The reason I'm giving us these numbers is not so that we can say, well, there's only 1% of people who practice Buddhism, so we don't need to worry about them. I'm giving us these numbers so that we can have in our hands some actual numbers about who lives in our community. So we know who they are and begin to get a sense of what our communal demographic looks like. Do you have a question?
David, I just noticed Anthony's up, that's about 70%, so I assume that 30% are unchurched.
That may be the case as well. I hadn't done any numbers on it.
The Anthony's up, it's about 70% is all the way.
Right.
So there's 30% unaccounted for.
Who have no religious affiliation at all. And that's a good thing to keep in mind too. They represent a part of our mission field, right? And so that's something we should keep in mind as well as we move forward. So I don't know if you all heard what he said, but about 30%, if you add up the numbers, about 30% would have no religious affiliation at all. And so that's also an important number to keep in mind. Notice that doesn't tell us anything about cultural background, though, right? So they could be of different cultural backgrounds and still have no religious affiliation. But that's certainly an important piece to keep in mind as we move forward. The point I was making here a minute ago, though, is Christ says, "Whatever you have done to the least of these, you have done to me." Right? The call in our lives is to reach out to the least, the last, the lost. So just because the numbers are small doesn't mean that we get to dismiss them. They are still children of God, right? They are still people that God has created and God has called us to reach out to be in ministry to in our community. So I'm giving us these numbers so we can have some helpful information, but not so that we can write off groups or say that this is not something we need to be concerned about. Any other questions about anything we've gone over so far before I move into the last piece of the discussion? So I've given you a lot of information. We've talked about the scriptural piece, we've talked about the demographic piece. Yeah.
In our section before, I had a problem with the definition of enemy.
Mm.
If we love your enemy, or are we saying also love the person who's about to kill you?
Yeah, no, I think the real question that needs to be asked is not so much how to define the term enemy as much as how to define the word love. So I don't think Jesus would equivocate on the term enemy, right? I think that has a pretty straightforward definition. Your enemy is the person who hates you and who may go as far as to try to kill you. The real question is, what do actions of love look like, right? What does it mean to love somebody who's trying to kill you? It may mean taking self-protective measures, but asking how far do we go in those self-protective measures? Do we go as far as retaliation, revenge? Do we murder and kill to get back at the person who wants to murder and kill us? Right? So the question is not about who the enemy is. I think that's pretty clear. Where it gets harder to have the conversation is, what does it mean to love, right? And we have some great examples from like World War. In fact, one of the examples I want to give in a minute is from Corrie ten Boom. But examples of Bonhoeffer, right? Resistance movements during World War II that seek to protect those who are being harmed, that seek to resist those who are doing the harming, but wrestling with the question of what is a just or godly way of resisting the people who are trying to harm us, right? And so that's where the really interesting question comes into play.
There's some beautiful stories about World War II and World War I in that respect.
Yeah.
So love is different. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just a statement that these figures are Johns Creek City proper. Right?
Yes, there was one actually. I meant to make this note. The trends over time. That refers to. I think it's the trends over time refers to Georgia more broadly. I meant to make a note about that, and I didn't. I apologize. All the other statistics, all the other graphs deal specifically with Johns Creek, but the one that deals with trends over time. There's actually, I think there's a note in your handout on that. I think there's a little bracketed note that those deal with Georgia. I could not find numbers that would help me track that over the course of just Johns Creek. So those deal with Georgia more broadly, but I think you'll find that those are not. I think those would probably still gives a pretty clear sense of where we are. I don't think they're-
My thought in my mind was that this is a good indication about what our area is, not just the city, but our mission field is actually much bigger.
Than just Johns Creek, yes.
The
Yeah.
numbers are much larger than
And-
what these numbers really say.
And
Sure,
David,
sure.
if anyone would like to have specific numbers for their neighborhood, you can see me and I can generate those more discreetly for your, maybe not neighborhood, but a radius around an address. That's easy to do.
That'd be great, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts before we move forward? So the final piece of the conversation is one that I think we've kind of, I think your question helps us segue pretty nicely into this. The question of how we begin reaching out to our mission field. What is our missional response to our community? And I actually want to read you an excerpt from this really wonderful book. It's called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. I don't know if you all are familiar with this or not, but Corrie ten Boom, her and her family were one of those families during World War II that helped house and hide and protect a handful of Jews from the Nazi occupation. And Corrie ten Boom and her sister were actually taken into concentration camps themselves. Her sister died in the concentration camp. This is a really wonderful book about her spiritual experience during all of that. And it's a really, it's amazing how joy-filled her recounting of this is. Not joy-filled in the sense that this was a wonderful and amazing experience, but how she remained connected to God through all of this, and how she continued to experience the joy of God in the midst of these otherwise horrible circumstances. But it also gives us a good glimpse into what it looks like to be neighborly to those who are different from us, religiously and culturally speaking. And I just want to read you one excerpt here really quickly as we transition into this. Her father was a watchmaker and watch salesman in a small little community, a small little village, and he would often travel to other villages and communities to get parts or to work with other watchmakers, exchanging parts and exchanging goods to sell and distribute their goods. And so this is a description of some of those experiences. Father always arrived a couple of hours before the time signal in order to visit the wholesalers who supplied him with watches and parts. Many of these were Jews, and these were the visits we both liked best. After the briefest possible discussion of business, Father would draw a small Bible from his traveling case. The wholesaler, whose beard would be even longer and fuller than Father's, would snatch a book or a scroll out of a drawer, clap a prayer cap onto his head, and the two of them would be off, arguing, comparing, interrupting, contradicting, reveling in each other's company. And then, just when I had decided that this time I had really been forgotten, the wholesaler would look up, catch sight of me as though for the first time, and strike his forehead with the heel of his hand. A guest in my gates, and I have offered her no refreshment. And springing up, he would rummage under shelves and into cupboards and before long I would be holding on my lap a plate of the most delicious treats in the world, honey cakes and date cakes and a kind of confection of nuts, fruits, and sugar. Desserts were rare, and the sticky delights like these unknown. I find this to be a very beautiful account of what these sorts of interreligious encounters can look like. Right? These are two different people from two different religious backgrounds with very different ways of understanding religious faith, and yet they were friends. Right? The delight and joy they had, the eagerness they had of getting the business out of the way so they could pull out their scriptures and begin to discuss and debate and to revel in that discussion. Notice that nobody's being asked to compromise, right? Nobody in this story is being asked to say, well, okay, I'm just not going to believe what I believe anymore. They argue and debate. They go back and forth, right? There's discussion, there's real disagreement. But it's not done in a spirit of vindictiveness or hatred or animosity. It's done in the context of friendship, right? And in the midst of all this, the Jewish host says, "Oh, a guest! I forgot, a guest in my house. I need to provide you with food. Make sure you feel welcome," right? And then as we read more of Corrie ten Boom's story, we realize that they begin to open up their own home, even at their own peril, their own danger, to welcome these and harbor these Jews, hide them from the Nazi occupation, from potential death and the concentration camps. And they put themselves on the line to their own peril, to the point that they wind up themselves in concentration camps, and some of them die as well, protecting their Jewish neighbors. Right? I think this is a beautiful model of what our missional response in our community can look like. It does not have to be us versus them. It does not have to be us acquiescing to them or acquiescing to different beliefs that we don't hold. It can involve debate and discussion and dialogue. It can include all of these things. But it can be done in a spirit of love and compassion and friendship. In the final week of our session, I think we're running out of time today, but in the final week of our session, we're going to devote most of our time to talking about this. What does it look like for us to reach out to our community? What are the ways that we can engage in mission with the people around us? I just want to kind of leave us with some food for thought today as we begin thinking about this over the next few weeks. One of the best ways to reach out to a mission community is to think in terms of service. How can we be of service? Either to the people who are different, or by partnering with them to be of service to others who are in need. How can we be of service? But a first step in being of service is friendship. How can we be friends? How can we reach our hand out and be welcoming and inviting and create a friendship with people who are different from us? And hopefully we'll get a chance to begin doing that here in this room over the next couple of weeks as we invite people, representatives from these other faith communities to come and share about their faith with us. How can we welcome them, put our hand out, be a friend to them, develop a friendship with them, one that will hopefully grow outside of these rooms and beyond Join Together July and into our faith community in the months and years to come. I think we're drawing to our end of our time. Are there any other thoughts or comments or questions about anything we've gone over? Yes?
Today was wonderful. If we have to miss one of the sessions, is it being recorded?
We are actually recording it. So Pastor Brandon today has been good enough to use his phone to videotape this, and we're also, one of the reasons I'm using this Rockstar microphone up here is so that we can have an audio recording as well. We'll do that for each of the sessions. That way.
Post it on the site?
I'm sorry?
Okay, we'll post it on the...
Yes, we'll have those posted on the website. Along those same lines, I hope to have some other things posted on the website that you all can engage with in the next couple of weeks to prepare for sessions. So as one example, I hope to have a video up this week It's called, what's the first part of the title? The second part is What a Billion Muslims Really Believe. There's an inside Islam, What a Billion Muslims Really Believe. I hope to have that video up and running on the website this week. I'd encourage all of you to watch that. You can find it on your own on the internet, or you can hopefully find it on our website. I think it's a very insightful and helpful video, and it gives us some demographic information about Muslims. One of the things, let me just make one note, one of the things I thought was absolutely staggering about the video, there literally are about 1 billion Muslims in the world, and terrorists make up less than 1% of those billion people. Less than 1%. They get 100% of attention in our media, but they represent less than 1% of the entire Muslim population. I think that's very helpful information there. So I would encourage you all to view that over the next week. We'll have some other things online. There's also a little cart over here with some books about world religions, all taken from our adult education library. So I encourage you to come look at those as well. So that hopefully we will have lots of information for you to supplement what we're doing here on Sunday mornings. So thank you. That's a great question. Any other questions? Thank you all so much for having me here today. I appreciate it. As I said, next week we will have a guest with us. His name is Tarif Saeed, and he's a terrific guy. I've had a chance to meet him and talk to him, and we'll be having lunch with him tomorrow, actually, to help him kind of get ready. It'll be, like I said before, it'll be a panel discussion, sort of an informal opportunity for him to share, and there'll be some time for question and answer as well. On the back of your handout, we'll be passing out updated versions of these each week. The handout you got when you first came in. There's a space for notes if you want to take notes. There's some reflection questions at the bottom you can think about during the course of the week. And there's also a little helpful guideline for discussion. And that's really intended for the next couple of weeks when we have guests with us. What are some appropriate ways that we can, when we have question and answer time, how can we ask those questions in a way that's loving and compassionate and Christ-like? Okay? Let's go ahead and close in prayer, and then we will be dismissed. Gracious God, we thank you so much for this opportunity today to come and to begin discussing what it means to love our neighbor and to love our enemies. Christ, you call us to a hard task. It is an impossible task. Who of us here can love our enemies? Who of us here, except you, can hang on a cross with his killers standing in front of him and pray sincerely, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Lord, you call us to show the same love and compassion to our enemies. It is something that we are incapable of doing on our own, apart from you. And so what we really ask for today, Lord, is an inbreathing of your Holy Spirit. That you would fill us with your love and your compassion. That you would give us your eyes to see, and your ears to hear, and your compassion to feel, so that we can go into the world and love our neighbors and be neighbors to our community. Pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.